Blair was woken up by someone's voice. He slowly opened his eyes and suddenly everyone around him started laughing. One of the students asked how someone so foolish could still be studying there. Blair was scolded again. He scratched his head and wondered where he was. Is this a dream? He thought. The girl sitting next to him whispered that their teacher, Brittany, had been calling him again. So Blair turned around and saw his teacher behind him. She leaned over, looking annoyed, and asked if he had slept so deeply that he forgot where he was. So Blair looked at her and thought, is this really my teacher? She pulled his ear and reminded him that he should know better than to sleep during her lessons. So you must know how important mathematics is, she said, then told him to stand up and answer the question on the board. Blair walked up to the board, feeling like the problem was too hard. However, the problem was just simple addition. The teacher noticed that Blair was standing still and told him to solve it at home and show her the answer tomorrow as punishment for falling asleep in class. The other students laughed, saying he wouldn't be able to solve it even in 3 days. They mocked him, saying math is one of the most important subjects and someone as dumb as him could never figure it out. But Blair smiled and started writing something on the board. His teacher thought, is he acting like he knows the answer, like a real expert? After Blair finished writing, the teacher was shocked. She couldn't believe it. So Blair then turned to the teacher and asked if he could go to the toilet. She agreed, and the other students were amazed. Did he really solve it? They asked. He just wrote a random number. One of them said, but the teacher disagreed. She said Blair's answer was absolutely correct. As Blair left the classroom, the students couldn't stop exclaiming in surprise. How is this possible? Someone said. Even the teacher had taken hours to solve that problem. Blair thought to himself, that wasn't even a hard question. It's not like it was an advanced math problem. In reality, Blair wasn't who everyone thought he was. He had the memories of Chen Luo, a dedicated mathematics teacher who had spent years teaching after graduating from university. Chen Luo had been working hard to earn a higher academic title. But during a key moment in his life, something strange happened. He moved to another world. He had just taken a short nap during an exam, and when he woke up, he found himself in a completely different place. This doesn't make any sense, Chen Luo thought. This isn't a comic book. How did I end up here? He had moved into the body of a student named Blair, who was terrible at math. The whole class thought Blair was a fool, and based on what had just happened, Chen Luo could understand why. In this new world, math was highly respected, but the level of knowledge was really low, and even elementary school students from his old world could solve problems that seemed impossible here. People in this world could only add numbers one at a time. Chen Luo thought, if I can't go back, I'll become the best mathematician in this world. I will rise to the top, even in another world. Suddenly, as he was lost in thought, a girl came around the corner, and they bumped into each other, both falling to the floor. Blair apologized quickly, but then he noticed he was hovering over her, and she looked upset. He quickly pulled back, offering her a hand to help her up. Looking away, Blair said he hadn't meant for this to happen. The girl jumped to her feet and recognized him right away. She shouted, "It's you again." Blair pointed to himself, surprised. "Do you know me?" he asked. She angrily replied that she remembered him because he had pushed her during the entrance ceremony, embarrassing her in front of everyone. "You ruined everything for me," she said. She believed Blair had done it on purpose and was still holding the grudge. Blair was confused and thought, am I in trouble? What's going on? Wasn't it her who ran into me? He tried to explain that he wasn't guarding her or waiting for her on purpose. Besides, didn't you bump into me? He asked. The girl, however, told him to stop talking. She began moving her fingers, muttering something about controlling fire. Blair looked at her, unimpressed, and said, "You really think you have magic?" He started joking around, waving his hands in the air and pretending to cast a spell, saying, "Ancient god of darkness, look at me." To his surprise, the girl's spell actually worked, and fire appeared in her hand. Blair froze, and the girl attacked him with fire, telling him to take what he deserved. Blair panicked and realized he had forgotten something important. Magic was real in this world. I just got here, and they're already throwing fireballs at me, he thought. Not knowing what else to do, he asked her to stop, but she called him shameless and said he deserved punishment. Thinking quickly, Blair bowed deeply and apologized, telling her he had been very rude, and asking her to accept his apology. A real man knows how to adapt to the situation, he thought. The girl seemed surprised by his sudden change in behavior, and the fire in her hand disappeared. She told him not to think he could get away with just an apology, but when she looked up, Blair was already gone. Meanwhile, Blair was running as fast as he could across the school grounds, thinking, what's wrong with this world? Do science and magic really exist together here? Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his head. He sat down, clutching his head, as memories flooded his mind. In those memories, Blair was crying, calling out for his father, while people told him that the general had given his life for his homeland. One of the men handed Blair's mother a box, and Blair and his mother moved to a modest house after his father died. The people around them gossiped, with one woman telling her friend that Blair's mother came from an aristocratic family. Her friend asked, what kind of aristocracy is left here? After the death of her husband, they had become so poor that they had to work hard just to get by. 2 years went by, and one day a joyful Blair came to his mother with exciting news. He had been accepted into Shona Academy. But his mother was happy but told him to make sure he studied well. Blair reassured her, saying, don't worry, I'm already an adult now. His mother thought about how quickly he had grown and imagined his future. Blair often spent time in the library. The old man who worked there once warned him not to spend too long reading or he wouldn't let Blair sleep there anymore. Blair ignored him and kept reading books, determined to restore his family's lost honor. However, things weren't going as well at the academy. Blair tried to cast spells like the other students, but nothing worked for him. His classmates made fun of him, saying that even though he tried so hard, he couldn't even manage to create a small fireball. They said he had no talent for magic. Some students also whispered that, despite being from a noble family, Blair's family was too poor to hire him as a servant. They said he was such a mediocre student that he would soon be expelled from the academy. Blair wasn't just bad at magic, he was also terrible at mathematics. People assumed that Blair never had a good teacher growing up. If it weren't for the reputation of his father, who had been a respected general, Blair wouldn't have even been accepted into the academy. Some students even commented on Blair's black hair and brown eyes, saying that he didn't look like he came from a noble bloodline. These painful memories flooded back into Blair's mind all at once. He could hear his own voice apologizing to his parents for being worthless, saying he was no good at magic or math. Blair snapped out of his thoughts when his classmate asked if he was okay. Blair looked up and recognized the girl. Her name was Jasmine, a fellow student from his class. She smiled at him and mentioned that there was a lesson on magic theory downstairs. She offered her hand to help him up. Blair accepted and thanked her, thinking that he didn't expect anyone to care about him. Blair realized that he now fully understood what had happened to the old Blair. Despite Blair's struggles, he was still determined to make something of himself. After they returned to class, the teacher began explaining how magic worked in this world. As everyone knows, the teacher said, there are 4 magical elements: earth, fire, wind, and water. All magic is based on these elements. Blair thought to himself, in this world, people are born either with the ability to use magic or without it. Both magic and science were important in this world, and the academy where they studied was famous for teaching magic. The teacher raised her hand and explained that magicians use spells, hand gestures, and spiritual power to control the elements. However, the teacher emphasized that to use magic, one needed natural talent. Without it, no amount of amounts would make someone a magician. After the lecture, the bell rang, and the students were relieved that the class was finally over. Some student complained that all the teachers did was lecture from textbooks, making class so boring. As the teacher began packing up his books, Blair approached him with a question. The teacher, recognizing him, asked if Blair had another question. Blair asked, without natural abilities, is it really impossible to use even a small amount of magic? The teacher sighed, apologizing as he repeated what he had told Blair many times before. Without natural talent, it was impossible to control magical elements. Other students began laughing at Blair, mocking him for asking the same question over and over. So mediocre Blair is daydreaming again, they said. He tries so hard in every class, but what's the point? But if you don't have talent, it won't magically appear. One boy patted Blair on the shoulder and told him that even if he didn't graduate, he could always work on his father's estate. The boy, Toby, smiled and assured Blair that he'd always share his bread with him. Blair recognized Toby as his only friend and appreciated his kindness. Toby smiled one last time before saying goodbye and leaving the classroom. Jasmine, still in the room, seemed like she wanted to say something to Blair. Blair noticed and asked her if something was on her mind. Jasmine hesitated but then blurted out, "That's not true." She quickly ran out of the classroom, saying that teacher Brittany wanted to see Blair in her office after class. So Blair replied that he understood, but as he watched Jasmine leave, he thought she had been acting strangely all day. It seemed like she wanted to tell him something important. Blair sat in the empty classroom, thinking about everything that had happened. He knew he was excellent at mathematics, but in a world where magic was essential, being good at math seemed meaningless. He was just an ordinary person born without any magical abilities. Despite his lack of talent, he decided to give it one more try. Blair focused and tried to cast a spell to summon fireballs, but as always, nothing happened. He sighed, wondering what he had been expecting. Just as he was about to give up, something incredible happened. Flames began to appear around him. The fire grew brighter and brighter until it enveloped his hand. Blair stared in shock at the flames dancing in his palm. "Is this a fireball?" he thought. But it can't be. This body shouldn't have any ability to use magic. Blair exhaled in disbelief and whispered to himself, "This is amazing. Fireball magic." Blair began playing with the fireball in his hand, marveling at it. He jokingly told the fireball to go out and play as he raised it above his head. It was a real, powerful fireball. Blair wondered if, by crossing into this new world, magical channels had somehow opened within him. But before he could explore this thought further, he remembered that he was supposed to see his teacher, Brittany. Realizing he was late, he quickly hurried to her office. When Blair arrived, he knocked on the door. His teacher, Brittany, told him to come in. As Blair opened the door, he apologized for being late, but suddenly stopped in his tracks. Brittany was standing at her desk, writing something while standing. Surprised, Blair called out to her, and she smiled, telling him she was glad he finally arrived. She then explained that she often stood while doing her calculations. It helped her think better. Blair awkwardly said it was fine, though he was curious about why she had called him. So Brittany motioned for Blair to sit down. She handed him a pen and some paper, telling him to solve a math problem. As Blair looked at the problem, which involved adding up numbers one at a time, Brittany excused herself from the office, telling him to take his time with the solution. However, Blair didn't need much time at all. After just a few moments, he called out the answer minus 3,160. Brittany was shocked. She rushed back over to him, touching his shoulder in disbelief. "How did you solve it so quickly?" she asked, clearly astonished. She admitted that the problem had taken her a long time to solve, and she had chosen the number 79 randomly. So Blair grinned and asked if she really wanted to know how he did it. Brittany was eager to find out and asked if he would explain it to her. Blair glanced off to the side before agreeing to share his method. He thought to himself that the teacher seemed almost too eager. Was she really this naive? Blair began explaining the problem to Brittany, pointing out that she had been solving it inefficiently by adding the numbers one by one. So this approach was not only slow, but it increased the chances of making mistakes. Blair complimented her for getting the correct answer but suggested there was a faster and more efficient method. Brittany was intrigued and asked Blair to explain further. Blair said that first they should look for a pattern in the numbers. So he started writing down his solution on the paper, explaining that the first number should be added to the last, the second to the penultimate, and so on, until they reached a sum of 80. Then, he asked Brittany how many pairs of numbers added up to 80. Brittany thought for a moment, then raised her hand and exclaimed, "There are 39 of them." "Exactly," Blair replied. He was impressed with her quick thinking and told her that she was doing great. He then apologized, realizing that it wasn't his place to be ordering her around. Brittany was a bit taken aback. Did Blair really just tell her to sit down? Brittany continued to listen as Blair explained that this method transformed a complicated addition problem into a much simpler multiplication one. She marveled at how easily Blair had solved the problem and mentioned that this approach could likely be improved further. Blair agreed and introduced the idea of using a formula for summing an arithmetic progression, which could make things even simpler. So as Blair wrote down the formula, Brittany was lost in thought, trying to grasp the concept. Blair waved his hand in front of her face to get her attention. To him, this was just basic elementary school math, but for Brittany, it seemed like an entirely new concept. Brittany asked if Blair had come up with this method on his own. Blair hesitated and replied that it was just something he found convenient. He thought to himself that even if he told her the true source of the idea, she probably wouldn't understand. Brittany grabbed Blair's hand and excitedly called him a genius, saying that he had a bright future ahead of him if he continued down this path. She got a little too close to Blair in her excitement, causing him to call out in alarm, so Brittany quickly backed away, apologizing for her enthusiasm. She then asked if Blair wanted to become an outstanding mathematician. Blair smiled but replied that he didn't want to be a mathematician, he wanted to become a great magician. Brittany tilted her head, puzzled. She then grabbed his hand again, insisting that with his talent for mathematics, it would be a waste for him to pursue magic. She knew that Blair didn't have the natural ability for magic, but with his mathematical skill, he could secure a high position in society. She urged him to reconsider and choose mathematics over magic. Blair pulled his hand away and firmly said that he still wanted to be a magician. He thought to himself that while becoming a mathematician would be the easier path, it wouldn't be satisfying. He would only be copying the discoveries of other great scientists and bringing them into this world. What truly excited him was the magic of this world, not the fame that came with being a mathematician. Brittany, sensing Blair's determination, proposed a bet. She reminded him that the magic exam was coming up in a few days. This exam would determine once and for all whether Blair could stay at the academy. Blair's heart sank at the thought of the exam. If he failed, he would be expelled. Brittany told him that if he truly wanted to become a magician, he would need to pass this exam. She showed him the calendar, pointing out the date of the exam. They made a bet. If Blair passed, she would stop trying to convince him to focus on mathematics. But if he failed, she would help him apply for a teaching assistantship, and he would have to give up on magic to focus on mathematics. Blair reluctantly agreed to the bet, though he knew the odds were against him. As he left Brittany's office, he thought about how stubborn she was. It kept pestering him about mathematics, but his heart was set on magic. He thought about how she told him not to forget their bet and promised himself that he would prove her wrong by mastering magic. As Blair was walking down the hallway, lost in thought, a girl suddenly jumped out from around a corner and collided with him. Blair fell to the floor and thought to himself that this situation felt oddly familiar. He realized he had grabbed onto something soft and quickly opened his eyes, horrified to see that he was holding onto the girl. The girl, furious, called him shameless and immediately began summoning fireball magic. Blair quickly scrambled to hide before the girl could turn him to ashes. He managed to escape, and the girl angrily yelled, "Where is he?" "That shameless bastard got away again." Blair sighed in relief, knowing he had narrowly avoided disaster. So meanwhile, back in Brittany's office, the same girl who had just encountered Blair entered, clearly upset. So Brittany, noticing her mood, asked Isella what happened. "You've been unhappy ever since you arrived." Nella, clearly frustrated, replied that she had run into a pervert twice at the academy that day. Brittany raised an eyebrow and asked, "Do we even have perverts here?" She then joked that any pervert would be unlucky if they encountered Nella. Nella, still irritated, responded that the next time she saw him, she would definitely hit him with a fireball. Brittany laughed and remarked that this was typical of Nella. So not wanting to dwell on the subject, Nella threw a stack of papers on Brittany's desk, announcing that she had already solved the problem they'd been discussing earlier. She proudly added that she only spent half the evening working on it, finishing it much faster than before. Brittany looked at the solution and complimented Nella, telling her that she was indeed solving problems faster than she was. However, Brittany also mentioned that Blair had managed to complete the same problem in just 1 minute. Nella was shocked and asked how that could be possible. She couldn't believe anyone could solve such a difficult problem so quickly. "So who is this Blair anyway?" she demanded, confused because she had never heard of someone like him before. So Brittany smiled, confirming that Blair had indeed only needed a minute to solve the problem. She explained that Blair had used a unique solution that she had never seen before. Brittany showed Nella a piece of paper with Blair's solution on it, pointing out how he had found a pattern in the numbers, summed them up, and then multiplied the sum by a logarithm, simplifying everything into a formula. Nella stared at the paper in disbelief before grabbing her head and exclaiming, "So it is possible to solve it this way?" And she was amazed by Blair's method. Brittany nodded, saying that she was just as surprised by Blair's talent. So Lala, now intrigued, expressed her desire to meet this Blair. Brittany, seeing the excitement in Nella's eyes, agreed to help her find him. A short while later, Nella stormed into Blair's classroom, kicking the door open with her foot. She loudly demanded, "Is Blair here? I want to meet him." The students were startled by her entrance. Toby, Blair's friend, was about to respond when Blair quickly pinched his leg from under the desk, signaling him to stay quiet. Toby awkwardly scratched his head and replied that Blair had just left for some business. So pointed and asked, did he leave again? She headed for the exit and instructed the class to let Blair know that she wanted to talk to him as soon as she returned. Toby agreed, and after Nella left the room, Blair crawled out from under the table. The classroom was silent, and everyone started giving Blair strange looks. Confused, Blair asked Toby why everyone was staring at him like that. Toby grabbed Blair by Claire's shoulder and told him to explain what had happened between him and Nella. Blair, still unsure, asked, "Is Nella her name?" Toby was baffled and asked Blair if he was really interested in anything other than books and part-time work. He then asked if Blair even knew who Nella was. Blair, now feeling nervous, asked who she was. Toby explained that Nella had a lot of fans at the academy. He warned Blair that if they found out he had upset their goddess, they wouldn't forgive him. So Blair, starting to panic, replied that this was Shinden Academy and surely people couldn't do whatever they wanted. Toby sighed and asked Blair if he even knew where the academy was located. Blair, confused, said it was on Baker Avenue in the city of Yabo. Toby sighed again, realizing that Blair really didn't know anything. He told Blair that Nella's father was the mayor of Yabo. Blair's eyes widened in shock. "What?" he exclaimed, realizing the trouble he had gotten himself into. He nervously asked Toby if apologizing to her would make things better. One of Blair's classmates overheard and mockingly asked if Blair had really dared to get into a conflict with Nella. So the boy sarcastically remarked that Blair didn't seem like he wanted to stay at the academy. Blair turned around, clearly frightened, and the boy Bud smirked, telling him that mediocre students like him wouldn't last long at the academy anyway. Blair thought to himself that Bud had always been a bully, picking on him whenever he got the chance. Toby, seeing Blair's distress, asked Bud if he was bullying Blair on purpose. Blair admitted to himself that Bud was right though. The academy wasn't just about magic, it also taught mathematics, history, philosophy, and other subjects. So if Blair couldn't become a magician, he could still pursue a career as a scientist or something similar, but in an academy as prestigious as Shinden, students were expected to have at least some magical ability. But without that, he wouldn't survive here. Bud slammed his fist on the table, interrupting Blair's thoughts. He pointed at Blair and called him an orphan mudblood. Toby stood up from his seat, glaring at Bud. He asked if Bud wanted to fight. Bud, surprised by Toby's boldness, asked why Toby was defending Blair. Toby replied that Blair was his friend, and if Bud had a problem with Blair, then it was his problem too. If Bud wanted to fight, Toby would be happy to oblige. Bud scowled and muttered that he would remember this. With that, Bud and his group of friends left the classroom. Blair watched them go and thought that despite Toby's usual carefree attitude, he was a loyal friend when it really mattered. He smiled at Toby and asked if Nella was causing him trouble. Would he help him out? Toby grinned and reassured Blair that of course he would, but then Toby joked that Blair owed him one now. Blair's smile faded and he groaned. A few days later, the day of the magic exam finally arrived. All the students gathered at the exam site, and the teacher announced that they would be tested on their fireball technique. So the students who failed the exam would not be allowed to continue their studies at the academy. Fireball was a basic magic spell, and the teacher believed that every student should be able to perform it. The task was simple. They had to stand behind a line and hit a target with their fireball. Child was the first to step forward. He confidently cast a fireball spell, extended his hand, and sent the fireball flying towards the target. The teacher praised him, saying he had passed the exam. Next up was Linda, who also passed the exam. Bud looked back at Blair and smugly told him to enjoy his last moments at the academy. Toby, irritated, told Bud to shut up. The teacher then called Toby forward. Toby extended his hand and cast a spell, though his fireball was much smaller than Bud's. Still, it managed to hit the target. The teacher declared that Toby had passed, though the other students snickered at how small his fireball had been. Finally, it was Blair's turn. Blair stood there nervously, knowing that he didn't have any magical ability. He couldn't even create a fireball. The teacher, feeling sorry for Blair, sighed and announced that all second-year students had passed the exam. He tried to move on, but Bud quickly interrupted, pointing out that Blair hadn't taken the exam yet. The teacher looked at Blair and asked if he intended to skip the exam. Bud taunted Blair, asking if a student at the Magic Academy would really refuse to take the magic exam. All of Bud's friends started laughing and mocking Blair, saying that this idiot would surely get expelled. Bud sneered and suggested that maybe Blair should just give up now to avoid further embarrassment. A crowd of curious students gathered round, eager to see what would happen. Two girls even ran past teacher Brittany, gossiping that the idiot from the fifth group was about to make a fool of himself. Toby, noticing Blair's nervousness, put his hand on his shoulder and reassured him, "Ignore them, they just want to make fun of you." Blair pursed his lips, determined to give it a try despite the pressure. Teacher Brittany arrived at the scene and heard one student whisper, "He doesn't have any magical abilities, so why is he even trying?" Another student commented, "He probably still can't accept that he's untalented." Brittany, overhearing this, told everyone to calm down and give Blair a fair chance. "So then," he turned to Blair and asked once more, "Are you sure you want to attempt the exam?" Blair took a deep breath and nodded, confirming that he wanted to give it a shot. The teacher encouraged him, saying, "Whatever happens, you're doing well for trying." So Blair stepped in front of the target, knowing deep down that he didn't need to perform the spell's gestures, but he decided to do them anyway, just to maintain appearances. He began casting the spell, moving his hands as the heat began to build behind him. The air grew warmer, causing a few students to flinch, but no fireball appeared at first. As Bud leaned in, chuckling, "Look at him. Is that supposed to be powerful?" But just as Bud was laughing, Blair completed the spell, and to everyone's astonishment, a massive fireball burst into existence in front of him. He launched it toward the target, and the fireball hit with a loud explosion. The students were left in shock, their mouths hanging open. As the smoke cleared, they saw that the target was completely obliterated. The examiner, equally surprised, cleared his throat and announced that Blair had passed the exam. Bud stared at the shattered target in disbelief, muttering, "That's impossible." Meanwhile, Toby was overjoyed and playfully patted Blair on the head, asking, "Were you hiding your talent this whole time?" Teacher Anthony, who had been observing the whole scene, called Blair over to speak with him privately. So Brittany, another teacher, was also deep in thought, trying to comprehend how Blair could have done such a thing. Anthony took Blair aside and asked if he had been practicing magic every day by reading books, which had somehow led to him creating a fireball. Blair confirmed this, and Anthony smiled, explaining that magic is a gift from the gods. In ancient times, even the most powerful magicians used gestures and spells to harness their abilities. People without magical abilities were often referred to as the abandoned of the gods. Anthony continued, saying that sometimes, very rarely, the gods would reward someone like Blair with magical power later in life. He praised Blair for showing such excellent speed and strength during the exam, and reassured him that he had great potential as a wizard. Blair was a bit overwhelmed. Just a few days ago, everyone had been encouraging him to pursue mathematics, and now he was being praised for magic. He thanked Anthony for his kind words and admitted that when he first came to this world, magic had fascinated him. However, in his mind, Blair realized he had let slip something important. Anthony raised an eyebrow and asked, "To this world? What do you mean?" Blair quickly backtracked, apologizing and saying he was just spouting nonsense because he had been reading too many books on magic. He berated himself silently for revealing too much. Anthony, misunderstanding, thought Blair had been referring to the ancient legends of the Holy Master, a powerful magician from myth. Curious, Blair asked Anthony about the Holy Master. Anthony explained that according to legend, the Holy Master had such control over space that they could tear it apart and travel to other worlds. However, Anthony assured Blair that these were just legends. The gods only created this world, he said, so there are no other worlds. Blair was stunned by this revelation. Space manipulation, a gap between worlds. He grabbed Anthony by the shoulders in excitement, startling the teacher. "I have to become a Holy Master," Blair exclaimed. After the magic exam, the Academy announced a few days off. During this time, Blair dedicated himself to reading every book on magic he could find in the library. He learned that mages were ranked in 7 levels: low, medium, high, great magician, master, grand master, and finally sacred master. The sacred masters were legendary figures, said to possess the power of space magic, which allowed them to tear through space and travel between worlds. So although many now believe these stories were just myths, Blair saw this as an only hope of returning to his own world. Unfortunately, Blair realized that teacher Anthony didn't believe in space magic, so he wouldn't be able to provide any new information. While Blair was deep in thought, the old librarian approached, tapping the table and asking if Blair had finished reading everything. The old man grumbled that it was time to get back to work. The library wasn't a place for idlers. So Blair awkwardly scratched the back of his head, assuring the librarian he was on his way out. Time passed quickly. The next morning, Blair left the library feeling physically exhausted from all the work. His lower back ached, and his arms and legs were trembling. As he walked into class, he overheard students whispering about him. One student remarked that Blair had conjured the largest fireball during the test, even bigger than the teacher's. Another girl giggled, saying she hadn't noticed before, but Blair was actually quite handsome. No wonder Isabella showed up, she added. Blair's heart skipped a beat when he noticed Isabella sitting in his seat with her feet propped up on the desk. He quickly turned away, hoping she wouldn't see him. But it was too late. Isabella jumped up, exclaiming, "So you're the famous Blair." So Blair, already feeling the tension, turned to her and tried to explain, "Listen, it's just a misunderstanding." But Isabella cut him off, calling him a pervert and demanding that he shut up. Flames sparked around her hand as she prepared to cast a spell. Blair, panicking, asked, "You're not really going to do it here, are you?" Just as Isabella was about to cast the fireball, teacher Brittany arrived and grabbed her hand, stopping the spell. Brittany firmly asked why Isabella was trying to use magic in the classroom. Isabella, still furious, blamed everything on Blair. Brittany raised her hand, signaling for silence, and told both Blair and Isabella to come to her office. Isabella pouted but agreed, and Blair followed them, unsure of what was going to happen next. Inside Brittany's office, Blair nervously explained that he had accidentally bumped into Isabella and sincerely wanted to apologize. Brittany, calm and understanding, said that she believed him and knew it had been an accident. She told Isabella not to hold a grudge, and Isabella begrudgingly agreed to forgive him. Brittany then turned to Blair and praised his performance during the exam, saying he had exceeded her expectations. She asked if he could share how he, someone who supposedly didn't have the gift of magic, had managed to cast such a powerful spell. Blair, feeling awkward, replied that it was probably just luck. Then, he hesitated before asking Brittany a question. Do spells and hand gestures always have to be used to release magical elements? Isabella laughed at the question, mocking Blair for not knowing something so basic. Isabella mocked Blair for asking such a basic question. But Brittany answered seriously, explaining that even the strongest magicians needed spells and gestures. However, the more they understood their element, the less time it took to cast magic. She mentioned that only someone with divine enlightenment could summon an element without any gestures or facial. Blair wondered if, because he came from another world, the gods of this world had ignored him. Brittany told Blair that if he wanted to become a magician, he needed to study the theory of magic properly. So then, she handed him a piece of paper which turned out to be a scientific newsletter featuring an article she had written. And he explained that she had written about the method Blair used in the exam. And since he had contributed to the discovery, his name would be included in the publication. So Blair wasn't interested in fame and joked that he would rather be paid. To his delight, Brittany handed him 50 silver coins as a reward. Blair, thrilled at first, made the mistake of saying she should take half of the reward since she contributed too. Brittany happily accepted, leaving Blair with only 25 silver pieces, much to his regret. He realized he needed to be more careful with his words in the future. So later, Blair came up with an idea for solving a famous mathematical problem, Ralph's riddle, using a new method. Brittany was amazed by his mathematical skills and encouraged him to publish his solution. Blair modestly explained that he had been working on it for a while, and after hours of discussion, they successfully solved the riddle. Brittany was so impressed that she invited Blair to continue his research with her, but Blair declined, saying he wasn't particularly talented and only studied when others were asleep, pointed at her and said that he didn't have any special talents, he simply studied while everyone else was asleep. Isella, astonished, couldn't believe how casually Blair described his intense dedication to learning. Meanwhile, Isella later found herself walking down a hallway, reflecting on the strange but logical things Blair had said. She didn't know why, but his words left her feeling uneasy. As she continued, she spotted Blair near the third-year building and quickly hid around a corner. What's he doing here? Isn't he in his second year? She thought, determined to catch him in the act. She peered around the corner only to realize he had vanished. So Blair, however, was already outside, remembering Toby's tip about the low stone fence behind the third-year building, and he knew there wouldn't be anyone there, and he could slip out without causing any trouble. So reaching the fence, Blair thought about Anthony's teacher, who had recently advised him to visit the Magic Association in Yabo City if he wanted to seishi. Arriving in Yabo City, Blair marveled at the bustling streets full of merchants and townspeople. Spotting the grand building of the Magic Association, he thought it looked luxurious. And deciding to be cautious, he pulled out a mask and slipped it on before entering the association. At the reception desk, he was greeted by Jasmine, a familiar face from his group at the academy. Surprised to see her working here, Blair explained that he was looking for a magic consultant. Jasmine, not recognizing him behind the mask, informed him of the fees for different levels of mentors, with high-level consultants costing 10 gold a month. Airing the prices, Blair quickly did the math in his head. With only 30 silver pieces left, he realized he was far from affording even the lowest level mentor. Apologizing, he turned to leave, but Jasmine stopped him and suggested he might be interested in a subscription to their library. She explained that the library housed tens of thousands of publications on magic, and all that knowledge was available for free. Blair's mood brightened, and he eagerly asked if he could subscribe. Jasmine said he needed to show proof that he was studying magic in order to get a library card. Blair's enthusiasm quickly deflated. He didn't have the credentials, and now he thought it might be better for Isella to just kill him than to face this setback. Sensing his frustration, Jasmine assured him that proving his abilities wasn't too difficult. For example, if you wanted to prove his skill in fire magic, he just needed to create a fireball in front of an expert. Blair asked if that could be done here, and Jasmine confirmed it, although she warned that today's expert was notoriously strict, with a pass rate of only 10%. Despite hearing that 300 magicians had already failed his exam, Blair confidently agreed to take the test. Jasmine led him to Mr. Andre, a mid-level fire magician dressed in a red robe with 2 silver stripes. Andre, sipping tea, asked for Blair's name and why he was wearing a mask. Blair, using the alias Canduo, explained that he had burned his face while practicing fireball techniques. The old man next to Andre joked that Blair must be pretty bad at fireballs if he burned himself. So undeterred, Blair prepared for the exam. Andre invited Blair to attack him with a fireball, assuring him there was plenty of space for the demonstration. Blair, focusing intently, began casting the spell. Flames gathered around him, and Andre's initial calm turned to concern. So when Blair completed the spell, he unleashed a massive fireball that caused a powerful explosion. As the smoke cleared, Andre, protected by the old man's shield, was visibly shaken. Blair, acting nonchalant, apologized for hitting with full force, assuming they were ready. Jasmine, still coughing from the smoke, handed Blair his magician's ID and library card, commending him on his impressive fireball technique. She remarked that with skills like his, Blair would one day become a great magician. Blair, grinning behind his mask, thanked her and said they'd see each other later. So as he left, Jasmine wondered how he knew her name. So at the library, Blair marveled at the sheer number of books, far more than he had access to at the academy. Sitting down to read, he realized Jasmine was right. The content here was much more in-depth than anything he'd studied before. The level of magical spiritual power is the main criterion for determining the strength of a magician. The higher the spiritual power, the more closely it is connected to the magical elements, resulting in stronger magic. So moreover, high-level mages with significant spiritual power can even control the magical elements of lower-level mages. This leads to the conclusion that during battles between mages, there is almost no way to overcome the difference in levels. However, books about the 4 magical elements are written rather chaotically, as the level of education in this world is quite low. Magicians believe that the 4 elements are not only the basis of magic, but also the foundation of the entire world. The remaining elements are combined into these main 4 elements in certain proportions. If viewed from the perspective of modern science, their worldview appears very primitive. According to the laws of physics, all matter consists of atoms. Atoms form molecules through covalent bonds and through ionic bonds. They combine into ion, different chemical elements with varying structures. Even high school students know that matter is made up of different elements, and the so-called 4 elements do not exist in the periodic table. Yet, since there are magical elements in this world, a scientific explanation for them is elusive. What if in this world, one could interact with magical elements? Suddenly, he jumped up from his seat, startling the other library patrons. He thought that if he could interact with these elements, he might create new magic. He grabbed the library card and ran out, determined to try this. Meanwhile, Andre and the old man were watching him. Jasmine brought 2 cups of coffee and said it was their order. Andre looked at Blair and remarked that Chen Luo had very low spiritual power, yet he was able to create an unimaginably strong fireball. The old man added that what was even stranger was that Chen Luo could not control the summon element. Perhaps he possessed something they could not understand. After a while, Blair returned to the academy and climbed over the fence. He found himself in a clearing and thought that since there was no one around, he would try to experiment right there. He began to concentrate and inhaled thick smoke. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and realized he could feel and control the flow of smoke emanating from his hand. He thought about directing the flow into the second element. A clot formed in his hand, and he wondered if it was oxygen. However, he couldn't determine it by sight. As the substance continued to form, he thought, "This is it." He decided to use the fire element and wondered if it was indeed oxygen. But suddenly the fire went out, and he exclaimed, "Apparently not. This is not what I imagined." He was left with a thin stream of smoke, but he refused to believe he couldn't do it. He tried again, and magical energy began to gather around him. As a result, the glass and other fragile items in the academy began to crack. Brittany, who was working at the time, felt the energy fluctuations and looked at the cracked window, witnessing an explosion outside. Meanwhile, smoke began to rise in the forest, and Blair started to cough. Within seconds, the smoke began to clear, and he thought it was fortunate that he had reacted quickly. However, he felt a bit scared when he saw a large depression in the ground, realizing it was due to an explosion. Everything around was completely burnt. When flammable substances combine with air, they produce carbon dioxide, water, and sulfur dioxide. Complete combustion releases the entire heating value of the fuel. It seemed that this oxygen was even purer than he had expected. Suddenly, Blair heard a student shouting, "What happened there?" He started to run away, thinking he hadn't anticipated so much noise. The student called out to him, but Blair continued running, believing he had made a little noise but had created something worthwhile. The next day, he sat in class, dozing off and thinking he would never study all night again. Suddenly, Toby put his hand on his back and asked if he knew what had happened at the academy last night. So Blair replied that he had slept like a log and asked what had happened. Toby informed him that there had been an explosion near the 3rd-year building, breaking all the windows. So the academy was investigating, and he suspected it was the work of a high-level magician. But he hadn't seen what had happened, but he believed only a high-level magician could possess such power. Blair replied that he didn't know, as he had never even seen such magicians. Toby asked how he could not have seen high-level magicians, pointing out that Brittany's teacher was a high-level magician. Blair was very surprised. After that, he knocked on the door of Brittany's office and she opened it for him. She said he was just in time because she needed him. She showed him the newspaper and informed him that the Association of Mathematicians had already published an article about the ruse riddle. Since he proposed this solution method, his name was listed first among the authors. She congratulated him. He had solved the most difficult problem in the world of mathematics. Blair said he came to her on important business. She asked if it was important, and he replied that she should let him do math with her. Brittany was surprised and asked if he hadn't said he wanted to become a magician. Blair explained that he did want to become a magician, but he also liked mathematics and didn't want to regret it later. It even seemed to him that in a past life he had been an outstanding mathematician, as great as she was. She grabbed his hand and expressed her joy at hearing this. She hugged him to her chest and said that from now on, every day after school they would do math together. A volcanic eruption occurred in Blair's head, and he quickly pulled away from the enthusiastic teacher. She assured him that with his abilities, he just needed to strengthen them, and he would definitely become a great scientist. Blair asked if she would help him with questions about magic. Brittany agreed, and Blair thanked her before leaving her office. But Brittany reminded him not to forget to come tomorrow. As he said goodbye, Brittany told him to wait. She didn't say anything, and Blair called out to her questioningly. Brittany thought for a moment, and after a short pause, said she had considered something. He decided to study mathematics with her not just for her help with magic. Blair realized she understood understood everything and saw her waiting for an answer. At that moment, different thoughts began to flash through his mind. What should he do now? He would have to leave this world forever. She would rip his head off, and he wanted to live a little longer. Then he opened his mouth, and after a second, asked what she meant. He had just thought that since they would spend so much time together, it would be more convenient for him to ask her about magic. She walked up to him and placed her hand on his shoulder, saying that he had a talent for mathematics and could use it as a tool. She led him to the exit of the office and told him to go and rest, reminding him to come after class. Blair left the office, thinking that this woman was both smart and foolish at the same time. The next evening, he arrived at Brittany's office and announced his presence, but he stopped in the passage when he saw Isela inside. She looked at him with irritation and asked why he had come. Brittany apologized and explained that she had forgotten to mention that from today, Blair would also be doing math with them, so Isela should take care of him. Isela turned away sharply, and Brittany told Blair to sit next to her. Isela had prepared a task for him. They threw one stone into the well, and after a while, they threw another stone that was twice as heavy as the first. So the question was, when would the second stone catch up with the first? Isela said that to solve this problem, they would need to know the interval. Blair interrupted her, replying that the first stone would never catch up with the second. Strictly speaking, if they did not consider air resistance, the larger stone would never catch up with the smaller one. Isela, displeased, said he didn't even know such basic things. Brittany chimed in, saying that while she didn't know what he meant by air resistance, everyone knew that the speed at which a body falls is directly proportional to its mass. Isela added that the greater the mass, the faster the body falls. This was established by ancient sages, and even children knew this. Blair listened to them and asked if the sages said so, then was it necessarily true? Had they ever seen this? Isela asked if he dared to challenge ancient wisdom. Brittany noticed an argument brewing and told them to stop. Suddenly, Isela interrupted her, suggesting they bet 10 gold pieces. Blair jumped up from his chair, asking why not. Brittany's teacher would be their witness. Brittany sighed tiredly, and they went to the tower. Brittany held the stones in her hands and said that one stone was twice the size of the other. She turned to Blair and told him to think again. After all, 10 gold was a decent amount. Blair replied that he had already thought about it. Isela asked if he really thought he would win. Blair remained silent, and Brittany said that self-confidence was good, but he didn't need to be too smug. After that, she rose into the air using the wind element, and Blair was surprised, saying that this was great. Isela explained that it was a wind element flying technique, but of course he didn't know anything about it. The Brittany climbed to the top of the tower, preparing to throw the stones. Isela grinned, telling Blair that he would lose. Brittany then extended both her arms forward and threw the stones. They flew down at the same time and fell simultaneously. Isela looked at the stones in surprise, while Blair grinned. When Brittany landed nearby and saw that the two stones lay next to each other, she was very surprised and exclaimed, "How is this possible?" Isela and Brittany thought they had fallen at the same time. Brittany looked at Blair and asked how he knew that the law of falling bodies was wrong. He replied that he had read this law in a textbook and checked it with two stones. This is how he realized that, in reality, the rules in the textbooks were different. Brittany pondered how truths that had been passed down for over 1,000 years could be disproven by just throwing two stones, and no one in 1,000 years had done this. How many scientists didn't know that the simple truths they accepted were not actually true? Why was Blair able to spot this so easily? She thought it wasn't all about luck. He probably never realized how important those two stones were. She believed that in the near future, a law under his name would appear in textbooks. Blair replied that there was still a lot of work to be done on the new law of falling, and besides, it was not only his merit, the three of them had done it. He thought that once again, he had received empty glory. He would play a little on emotions. Brittany replied that it was entirely his fault. She had just thrown two stones. However, if he wanted, they could finalize this law together with Isela. Isela asked if he wanted her help. Blair replied that he would, of course, need Isela's assistance. Would she help him? Isela was surprised and imagined them working together, remaining silent. And then she thought about whether he truly needed her help. She turned away from him and said that since he said so, she would help him. Blair thanked her, and Isela contemplated how it would sound, the law of falling bodies. Blair into Isela. She pursed her lips at such thoughts and told Blair that if someone offended him at the academy, he should let her know. She would help him. And she thought that Blair wasn't so bad. He was very smart and also handsome. Blair thanked her and then extended his hand to her. She wondered what he was doing. Did he want to shake her hand? What was he up to? And why was she so upset? She asked what he was doing. Blair replied replied that he was waiting for 10 gold pieces. He looked at her with a smile, thinking he was rich. Isella understood what he was thinking and thought that his head was full of only that. So after that, she gave him 10 gold pieces and told him not to count them. There were exactly 10. So Blair was delighted, thinking that in one bet he had won 10 gold pieces and had become rich in a day. Isella called out to him, saying that he seemed more interested in money than fame, but it seemed to her that he was not doing this only for the sake of money. Blair pondered this, and she asked what he wanted. Blair opened his mouth slightly but remained silent, deciding not to answer anything. He remembered moments from his previous life, then closed his eyes a little and asked what she was talking about. He just wanted to earn money and live better. He smiled and said it was late, he would go, and they would meet tomorrow. Isella felt a little upset as she watched him leave. The next day, Blair lay on his desk, thinking that it felt much more comfortable to sleep on this desk than in that cubicle. Well, at least now he had money. He must move on. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a sharp crash from a hit on the table. He saw that Bud had done it and said that Phage was looking for him, but he was still lying there. Blair asked who Phage was. Bud pulled him toward him by his clothes with displeasure, asking if he had completely lost his fear. Did he think that since he made a fireball, he could do anything? Suddenly, a guy came up to them and told Bud to let Blair go. Bud looked at the headman, Phage, and pursed his lips. Phage looked at Blair, and Blair looked at him, thinking, is this the Phage? Phage approached him and asked if his name was Blair. He smiled and Blair said nothing. Then he looked at Bud and asked if he had heard he was told to let him go. Bud reluctantly let him go, and Blair asked the headman if something had happened. Phage said he should stay away from Miss Isella. People like him shouldn't communicate with her. But he told his friends they were leaving, and one of them asked if they would do anything to him. Phage collided with Toby, rubbing his shoulder in displeasure as he headed toward the exit from the audience. Toby approached Blair and asked if he was okay. What happened? Blair replied that it was nothing. Phage and Bud just wanted to talk to him. Toby asked what Phage had done to him. Blair asked who Phage was. Was he afraid of him? Toby replied that Phage was the headman, and everyone at the academy was afraid of him. Only an eccentric like Blair, who always disappeared behind books, could not be afraid of him. Phage came from the famous Howard family of the city of Yabo. He was the son of a Viscount. So Viscount Howard was an important person in the Society of Numbers, and many teachers at the academy were also members of this society. But if he offended Phage, he would have a hard time at the academy. Blair realized that he was fascinated by Isella's beauty, but Toby advised him not to neglect Phage's warning. Blair asked in what sense he was fascinated. Time passed, and Blair came to the teacher's office, thinking that although the power of pure oxygen fireballs was enormous, he should first summon the ball and only then extract the oxygen element. That way, the ball would not explode, and his main advantage would be that he would not need spells and hand gestures. But how was it possible to assign two different elements at the same time? Isella called out to him, telling him that he had better solve the problem that teacher Brittany had given them. Tomorrow she would explain everything. After her words, Blair yawned and handed her a piece of paper with his solution. She was surprised and asked if he had already finished. She had only gotten through half of it. Blair replied that everything could not be solved in one old way. It was necessary to find original solutions. Isella looked at his solution and asked if it was possible to do so. He sat closer to her and asked if she could summon two fireballs at the same time. She replied that she could do several. And what is it? Blair asked in surprise. Several? How so? Isella smiled contentedly and asked if the brilliant Blair could only summon one at a time. Blair scratched his head and replied that he had received many books on magic, but had never found a way to summon more than one element at a time. So Isella explained that, of course, the books only contained the basics. There were no such artificial techniques. Her father had invited her to a high-ranking magic consultant who taught her how to summon several elements at the same time. But if someone called her sister, she would help him learn it. So Blair easily called her sister, and the smile on Isella's face began to fade. She was embarrassed and asked what kind of facial expression that was. She stood up and said that he should follow her. She would teach him. After that, they entered a clearing, and Brittany began to summon fireballs. She summoned several fireballs at once, and Blair was very surprised, saying that there were actually several of them and they were stable. Isella explained that the key to summoning multiple fireballs was the distribution of spiritual powers. Though many people thought that spiritual forces could only be directed to one place, but once he mastered this technique, he would be able to distribute the power to different places. places. Every part of this force was capable of summoning an element, allowing them to summon several balls. Blair asked if it was possible to summon different elements using different parts of the forces. Isella replied that it was a great question. In theory, it was possible. In practice, mastering magic proved challenging, akin to drawing a square with one hand while drawing a circle with the other. And meanwhile, Bud watched the unfolding events, wondering if they were in a relationship. Frustrated, he vented to Phage about Blair, breaking a wall with his fingers in anger, vowing that Blair would pay for this. Blair, on the other hand, struggled to cast a spell. He contemplated whether to divide his spiritual power into 9 particles. Concentrating hard, Isabella reminded him to follow her instructions closely, emphasizing that he must share the power step by step. She warned that if he failed, he shouldn't be too upset, recalling that it took her 6 months of training to master the technique. Suddenly, multiple fireballs appeared in Blair's hands, surprising Isabella. "How did you do that?" she asked, astonished. Blair explained he followed her guidance and successfully divided his spiritual power into 9 parts. She was taken aback, not expecting him to achieve this so quickly. "Of course, I figured it out faster," she huffed, her frustration evident. "I'm not teaching you anymore. You're on your own." Blair remained silent, pondering whether he had offended her yet again. Women were perplexing. While rummaging in his pocket, Blair stumbled upon a bracelet. Meanwhile, Brittany walked by and noticed the tension. Suddenly, Blair grabbed her hand, prompting her to turn and ask what he needed. He presented her with a bracelet adorned with a cat, expressing that his recent progress was thanks to her lessons and asking her to accept it as gratitude. Isabella blushed at the sight of the bracelet, but quickly dismissed it, claiming it was ugly as she snatched it from him and ran off. Suddenly, she stumbled, and Blair cautioned her to be careful. When she got up, she stared at him, and he hesitated, unsure whether to approach or feel sorry for her, fearing she might scold him. If the reason has happened, she shouted as she dashed away, leaving Blair puzzled and smiling awkwardly. He lay back on the grass, gazing at the sky and wondering why she had taken the bracelet if she didn't like it. Holy had spent 50 silver on it, initially intending to gift it to Brittany's teacher, but he thought it suited Isabella better. And his contemplation was interrupted when Bud and his friends blocked his view. Bud, reminding him of Elder Phage's warning, taunted him not to approach Isabella. So Blair stood up and tried to walk away, but Bud challenged him, questioning whether he'd really run away like his father. So this struck a nerve, causing Blair to turn back. He responded, stating he might not be his father, but he was a brave warrior who fought for his homeland. Bud laughed and pressed the attack, claiming Blair had asked for it. In a moment of anger, Blair conjured fireballs, making Bud wince. The others counted the fireballs in awe and fled in panic. "So where are you going?" Bud yelled, now scared as Blair approached. When he pressed him further, Bud leaned against a wall, claiming he didn't need to fight. But Blair insisted he should have thought of that sooner and prepared to unleash his fireballs. Suddenly, Bud spotted something behind Blair and screamed for help. As he opened his eyes, tears filled them when he saw Blair collapse before him, looking surprised. Bud panicked, realizing it was better to run away than to get involved. Teachers soon approached, with Brittany telling Bud to stop. He raised his hands defensively, claiming innocence. "I didn't do anything." He fell. Brittany pulled Blair to his feet, questioning how he ended up like this if Bud hadn't done anything. Bud, feeling cornered, insisted he was telling the truth, but the teachers didn't seem convinced. So Blair lay at the feet of the old man, who commanded him to stop. "Don't let him play the fool," the elder said. Noting that Blair continued to tarnish the academy's reputation, he instructed Blair to go to his office and wait there, promising to address the matter later. The old man turned to the vice chairman of the Archie Society, apologizing for the spectacle that had unfolded, stating it was the fault of the academy's management. Calvin, the vice chairman, acknowledged the situation, noting that conflicts among young people were common in educational institutions. However, he added that they needed to be stricter with students. Meanwhile, Brittany noticed Blair's weakened state and called out to him. He sighed, thinking he had gone to heaven. The heavens had smiled upon him. Brittany shook him, asking what was wrong. Blair replied that he was fine, only to feel her nearly strangle him with her concern. She hugged him tightly, expressing her relief and concern. Blair apologized to the teacher, and Calvin coughed to regain their attention. He informed Blair that they would address the incident, but first had something important to discuss. Brittany, realizing she hadn't introduced Blair, pointed to the old man, stating he was the vice chairman of the Calvin Society. So next to him stood the vice chairman of the Archie community, representing the Mathematical Society. Blair greeted them, and Calvin mentioned he had helped Brittany's teacher solve Ralph's riddle, a promising accomplishment. When Brittany interjected, clarifying that Blair had solved the riddle himself, she had merely assisted him in writing the article. Calvin continued, explaining that solving Ralph's riddle would nominate them for the prestigious Edwin Prize, a significant honor for the city of Yabo. He encouraged Brittany to consider it seriously, as the Edwin Prize was the most important award in the mathematical community and would greatly benefit both her and the academy. Brittany pondered the opportunity and asked Blair what he thought. Calvin sighed, adding that she was still too young. No one in the mathematical society had achieved results like hers. If she claimed Blair had solved the riddle, no one would believe it. Brittany wanted to object, but Blair took hand reassuringly. Calvin suggested they discuss it further with Blair when they made a decision, assuring her that their society would respect whatever choice they made. Brittany agreed, and they left to return to the academy. For walking down the corridor together, Brittany told Blair that while the solution to the riddle was not usually considered groundbreaking, its resolution was a monumental breakthrough in the history of mathematics, and it belonged to him, so a stranger shouldn't receive the award in his place. So Blair remained silent for a moment before responding that she didn't understand. He didn't deserve the award at all. He turned to her with a smile and added that she wasn't a stranger to him at all. Brittany looked surprised at his words, but before he could explain further, she cut him off, stating it was too late and she needed to get back to work. As Blair walked through the corridors, he noticed a crowd gathered around the notice board. Curiosity piqued, he approached to see what was happening. Students were discussing the latest news, speculating whether Blair had authored another article with his teacher. One student remarked on the significance of Ralph's riddle, noting that many scientists had struggled to solve it for centuries. Feeling the weight of their scrutiny, Blair moved past them, trying to hide his face. One student snickered, suggesting Blair was just trying to curry favor with the teacher. Blair sighed tiredly, realizing he hadn't expected Brittany's teacher to publish an article under both their names. Suddenly, he heard someone shouting and calling another an idiot. He rounded the corner to find Calvin confronted by Bud's father, who was furious. "Did you fight again at the academy?" the man scolded his son. "Is this what I sent you here for? To start fights?" He swung a stick, declaring he would teach Bud a lesson for his behavior, emphasizing how difficult it was for them to enroll him in the academy. Calvin, visibly concerned, apologized and noted that Bud's behavior was unacceptable and a serious violation of school rules. Bud's father fell to his knees, pleading with Calvin not to expel his son. Bud, embarrassed, urged his father to stop. Blair approached, calling out to Dean Calvin. The dean greeted him and explained the situation. Bud gritted his teeth, and Calvin revealed that Bud had violated academy rules and they had decided to expel him. Blair felt pity for Bud's father and sighed heavily. Despite their differences, he asked the dean not to punish Bud too harshly. A moment of silence passed between them, and the dean finally conceded that, since Blair was vouching for Bud, the academy could temporarily postpone the decision. He then looked at Bud and said that if he did something like that again, the academy wouldn't give him a second chance. Bud's father made him bow and said that he should quickly thank Blair and Dean Calvin. Bud thanked the dean and Blair and then bowed his head in apology. Dean Calvin said that was good and told them to go to class. Bud and Blair went to class together. Bud asked Blair why he had done that. Blair stopped at the door to the auditorium and, after a short pause, replied that he did not want to let his father down. Bud thought about this and thanked Blair again. As they entered the auditorium, Bud warned Blair to be careful with Age, saying that he wouldn't just let him go because his uncle was the deputy director of the academy. After class, Blair went to the library, thinking about how difficult today had been, and he also had to go to his part-time job. At the top of the stairs, he met the administrator, who asked if he had accidentally offended anyone. Blair inquired what happened. The administrator sighed and said that from today, he could no longer work in the library, and also could not live in his room, so this was an order from the deputy director. After that, Blair went to Brittany's office. She said she wanted to take her and Isella to a seminar at the Mathematical Society and asked if he had anything to do tomorrow. Blair smiled awkwardly and apologized, saying he had been kicked out of the library and needed to find a new place to live. She said he should have told her right away because she had a spare room at home. Blair remained silent, and Brittany continued that no one lived there so he could move in with her. Blair asked if they would live together and if that would be convenient. Brittany replied that it would be comfortable as they could study mathematics together anytime, and he could ask her questions. Blair thought this sounded good. Brittany smiled and said that after the ball he would move in. Isabella burst into the office and asked why Blair was there. Brittany replied that Blair was going with them to the seminar and that he had lost his job at the library, so he would be living with her. Isabella exclaimed, asking how she could live with this pervert. Brittany said she had told Isabella many times that Blair was not like that at all. Isabella replied that she was just worried about her teacher and that Blair was cunning. Blair got upset and asked why they called him that again. Brittany dragged Isabella to the exit, telling her not to worry and that they needed to change quickly for the seminar. She looked at Blair and asked if he had any clothes for the event. Since it was his first time participating in a scientific seminar, it would be better for him to wear something more formal. Blair asked if a magic robe would be suitable. Brittany replied that if he had it, it would be fine. In the evening, they went to the scientific seminar where many guests were gathered. Brittany and her students were dressed smartly. Blair looked at Isabella in her dress and commented that that they had arrived. Brittany explained that this was the Howard family's estate, where the Mathematical Society seminars were held. The society was a prominent organization in the kingdom of Dionin, so they chose the Howard estate for every seminar. Blair looked at the huge house and asked if Howard was a member of the Phage house. So Archie stood at the entrance to the estate, discussing various solutions with his friends. Brittany walked up to them and called out to Archie, who turned around and told her and Blair that they had already arrived. Blair greeted him, while Isabella, displeased, folded her arms across her chest and wondered when he met the deputy chairman of the Mathematical Society. Archie told Brittany that he and his friends were just talking about her and offered to introduce her to them. Brittany told Isabella and Blair to go ahead, she would find them later. Blair and Isabella went inside the WAP. Looking at the table, Blair thought there were many delicious dishes, realizing that rich people lived very differently. He tried the food and thought it was very tasty. He had never tasted anything like it. Isabella grabbed his hand and asked if he was a pig. She wondered if Brittany had taken them with her just so he could fill his belly and disgrace them. So Blair noticed something on the wall and asked about it. He saw a drawing of bridges, and Isabella explained that this was the pride of the Howard family, the 7 bridges of the royal capital. Someone nearby asked if Blair even knew about it, questioning if he came to participate in the seminar. Phage leaned against the wall and asked if Blair had come to his house just to ask for food. So he needed to talk to his servants about hygiene since they let someone like Blair into the house. Isabella defended Blair, saying he had come with them. Phage asked if he said something wrong, pointing out that Blair didn't even know about the 7 bridges of the royal capital, but had eaten a lot. Isabella started to lead Blair away, telling him to ignore Phage and that they had to go. So Phage got angry when he saw her holding Blair's hand and asked if Blair was still hiding under her skirt. Blair turned around and asked if there were really 7 bridges in the royal capital, sounding interested. Isabella called out to him, but he insisted he just wanted to hear about the 7 bayages. Maybe he could come up with a new method. Phage mocked him, saying that Brittany's teacher only felt sorry for him and wrote his name in the article, questioning whether he considered himself a gifted mathematician. Isabella exclaimed that Blair had come up with a way to solve the riddle, so his name was included. Phage replied that even if that were the case, he would see if Blair had any new ideas. He turned to the other guests and told them to look as Mr. Blair claimed he could find a solution to the 7 bridges of the royal capital. Isabella looked at Phage irritably. One guest said that Blair was the young man who could solve the riddle with Brittany's teacher. Another guest commented that Blair was still inexperienced and that Brittany must have taken pity on him by writing his name in the article. Brittany overheard and called Phage a math genius, asking why he didn't believe in him now. Brittany told him not to compare. Blair interrupted, saying it was no big deal and that he could try to solve it out of gratitude for Brittany helping him leave his position in the library. Brittany and Isabella were surprised, and the teacher asked if he really wanted to take on this challenge. Blair turned to Phage and said that since he insisted, he would solve the 7 bridges of the royal capital. Phage replied that he didn't think Blair was that stupid. Then he would see what he could do. The 7 bridges of the royal capital is a riddle invented by the first generation of the Howard family. Since then, several hundred years have passed, and except for the first generation, no one has been able to solve it. Hundreds of years ago, the head of their family was a high-ranking official. He noticed that the capital had a special layout at that time. The city was not yet large. It was divided into 2 islands located in the middle of the river. To enable movement between the islands, 7 bridges were built. These bridges connected the islands to each other and to the riverbanks, helping the residents of the capital establish mutually beneficial relationships. One day, the elder was looking at the 7 bridges and thought about whether it was possible to cross each bridge only once and still return to the starting point. So when the elder proposed this idea, mathematicians throughout the kingdom began to ponder the question. So many famous scientists came to the capital to find a solution. A lot of time passed, and they proposed various theories, but no one figured out how to return without crossing at least one bridge again. So then one day, the elder himself found a solution and announced it to all the mathematicians of the kingdom. The next day, everyone gathered on the bridges to see if his solution was correct. However, they waited until evening, but the elder did not appear. A few days later, they discovered his body. He had likely been so excited about his discovery that he accidentally tripped and drowned in the river. The death of the elder was a huge loss for the Mathematical Society of the kingdom. The 7 bridges of the royal capital remained unsolved, and even the Howard family still does not know the answer. Many mathematicians have tried to solve it, but no one has succeeded. Though the solution was lost, the family hung an engraving in their living room to preserve the memory of the elder and honor him. as the only one who found a solution. This engraving is a point of pride for the entire mathematical community. Blair thought about it and realized that the 7 bridges of the royal capital were similar to the 7 bridges of Kingberg. He replied that he would not be able to find a solution, but then no one else would either. Phage chuckled and laughed harder, asking if that was his answer. Wasn't he so sure he was a genius? So other guests began to wonder why they had come there. One girl commented that he was just a little arrogant child. Her friend wondered if she thought so, but she felt he wasn't as simple as he seemed. The Phage wiped away his tears from laughing, and Blair reiterated that he wouldn't find a solution because the riddle of the 7 bridges could not be solved. Isabella and Brittany asked at the same time if this problem could be resolved. Phage questioned what kind of nonsense he was talking about. If Blair couldn't solve it himself, how could the first-generation elder of the Howard family have done so? Blair replied that if he could prove he had actually found a solution, would that change anything? Phage got angry and exclaimed, "What does this mean? Does he dare to doubt? Does he even know what position the elder held in the kingdom?" Suddenly, a viscount told him to stop. He turned to his son and said he had told him many times not to boast about the glory of their ancestors. Phage was afraid and asked his father for forgiveness. The viscount approached Blair and asked if he was the Blair Calvin had talked about. Blair bowed and said it was a great honor. So the viscount explained that he had seen the argument with his son and admitted that Phage was wrong. Though he asked for forgiveness, but he insisted that claiming the 7 bridges of the royal capital has no solution discredits the honor of their ancestors. I hoped Blair would take back his words. Blair replied that he did not mean to offend him, but the 7 bridges of the royal capital truly had no solution. Isabella looked at Blair, realizing this was the first time she had seen him so confident. The viscount began to get angry and asked if he wanted to check. Blair replied that he could prove it to everyone and would explain why the royal capital family had no solution. He began drawing something on paper and explained that when faced with such a difficult problem, many sages at that time tried to find practical solutions themselves. This approach was worthy of respect, but he feared that the answer would be hard to find because there were too many options. If he finished drawing and showed the paper to the guests, then he explained that they could depict a complex, practical problem as a simple numerical one. Each piece of land could be a point, and they could represent the bridges connecting 2 sections as lines. So 7 bridges of the capital could then be simplified as follows. If they could exit from each point without repeating, it would mean they could return to the original place without crossing the bridges again. When guests exclaimed that it was possible, the girl was surprised and remarked that it was amazing. Another girl turned to her friend and said that it was impressive to simplify a practical problem into a drawing. She wasn't wrong. This showed that Blair was truly smart. Her friend just smiled. Blair continued, saying that it was clear that except for the initial starting point, when someone passes through a bridge on a piece of land, they leave another bridge behind. They would now call points connected by segments of unpaired numbers singular points, and those connected by segments of paired numbers paired points. Brittany said she understood. If they wanted to start from the starting point and eventually return to it, they needed to reach all the points and leave all the points. The solution would only be valid if all the points were paired. Blair said she was correct. That was the key point. One of the guests asked about the 4 points of the 7 bridges of the royal capital. Blair confirmed his words and pointed out that everyone could see that these 4 points near the 7 bridges were singular. Therefore, no matter what method they tried, they could never return to their original point without crossing the bridges again. Thus, the 7 bridges of the royal capital had no solution. All the guests froze in shock. So then one man said that this theory had no flaws, meaning the problem had no solution. Phage exclaimed that Blair was talking nonsense. The guests began to murmur among themselves in surprise, realizing that the Howard family had deceived them all these years. How could this be possible? There was no solution to the problem they had been led to believe in for so long. Phage told everyone not to listen to this fool's nonsense. The guests remained silent, and one girl expressed her fear that it was only their ancestor, the elder, who had spoken nonsense. He had deceived the entire kingdom for so many years. Phage called out to his father, but he did not respond. Phage then turned around and was immediately hit in the face by him. Phage fell to the floor from the blow as his father blamed him for his loose mouth, saying that if it weren't for him, he wouldn't have embarrassed him. The Viscount told Blair that he remembered what he said. He asked him to wait. Blair looked after the angry Viscount and asked him to wait. The Viscount turned around, and Blair said that according to the rules of the Mathematical Society, he had helped with Phage's question, so now he must help him with his question. So is he saying this correctly? The Viscount looked at his son and then replied that they would follow the rules of the Mathematical Society. He asked what kind of question Blair had. Blair said his question was very simple: if the sides of a square were equal to 1, then what is the diagonal? The Viscount was surprised, and Brittany asked Blair if he didn't know that the Howards had put forward the Howard theorem. The Viscount replied that according to the Howard theorem, if the sides of a square are equal to 1, then the square of the length of the diagonal is equal to 2. This is true. Blair shook his head, stating that he hadn't answered his question. He wasn't asking about the square of the diagonal, but about the diagonal itself. The Viscount clenched his teeth in anger, while one of the guests admitted he hadn't considered the diagonal itself. Another guest said he could probably demonstrate that too. The Viscount fell silent, and Blair thought this was exactly what he had expected. He was already aware of this number from the beginning. In his world, although scientists were respected, most people preferred gossip about celebrities to learning about those who contributed to humanity's progress. Here, science was at a low level, yet scientists were revered, knowledge was respected even more than magic. Scientists who made major contributions enjoyed not only international fame, but also respect from the royal family and aristocracy. And this allowed them to exert significant influence in economics and politics, forming a powerful force, the mathematical society. The Howard family occupied an important position within this community, giving them considerable authority. And even the head of Yabo City, Isabella's father, had to show due respect to the Howards. The mathematical society comprised scientists, politicians, and religious leaders who believed everything on Earth could be represented in numbers. So if their ideas were reminiscent of the Pythagorean school. Pythagoras, the great scientist of ancient Greece, had many followers, but there was one flaw that led to the school's demise. They expressed everything not in real numbers, but in rounded numbers. Pythagoras believed that by comparing rounded and real numbers, one could express all numbers in the world. A student of Pythagoras named Hippasus was the first to discover this flaw. He realized that it was impossible to express the diagonal of a square using the ratio of integers, a revelation that shook the very foundation of the Pythagorean school. When the students realized they could not solve this problem, they decided to deal with Hippasus. Ultimately, they tied a large stone to him and threw him into the sea. However, the truth couldn't remain hidden for long. More people began to pay attention to Hippasus' problem, leading to the destruction of the Pythagorean school. Numbers that could not be expressed using whole number ratios came to be known as irrational numbers. From that point on, people's understanding of numbers expanded, growing into a new field. Judging by the Viscount's expression, he had long been aware of the existence of irrational numbers. He wondered how people in this world viewed Hippasus. The Viscount wiped cold sweat, the cow state, from his brow. One guest commented that it was strange. Why couldn't they find this number? Another mathematician argued that it was impossible for there to be a quantity that couldn't be expressed by a number. What's wrong with this number? Can it be expressed in any way? Brittany asked. Blair replied that it was a completely new number, and many such numbers existed in this world. Someone had already discovered a similar number, but this discovery was kept secret. Thanks to Phi, however, this discovery would soon become known to people. Phage looked at his father and noticed his hands were shaking with anger. He grew frightened, and then Kirsten, looking at Blair, shouted that it was all his fault. She lunged at him, telling him to die, her fist clenched to strike him. Blair braced himself for the blow, but at the last moment, a girl grabbed Phage's arm. She exclaimed, "Who are you? Let me go." The girl apologized and explained that she had to stop him. Phage struggled to break free but found her grip surprisingly strong. Suddenly, he heard his father's voice from behind him. The Viscount called out, asking if Phage thought he hadn't done enough today. Phage turned around in fear as the Viscount addressed the guests, apologizing for the trouble his son had caused. He took the blame and promised to be stricter with Phage in the future. As for the number Blair mentioned, he assured them that their mathematical society would do their best to find an explanation. He thanked Blair for his insight and said he still had work to do and had to leave. He gritted his teeth, hoping for a pleasant evening at his estate. Blair thanked him in return, expressing that he too wished him a pleasant evening. He thought to himself that the mathematical society might find an explanation, but he didn't think they would succeed easily. The Viscount left, leading Phage with him, thinking that he hadn't anticipated such disgrace for their family. Soon afterward, Blair thanked the girl who had helped him and called her mistress. She asked, "So are you that callous?" Suddenly, Ella slapped him in the face, exclaiming, "Why are you opening your hands to strangers?" Blair defended himself, insisting he hadn't done anything to her. The girl laughed and apologized for interrupting, saying she was just joking. She added that they had such a good relationship. She was even a bit jealous. Isabella exclaimed, "Who's flirting here?" It wasn't what she thought. She called out to Alice, asking what she was doing there. So in response, Alice asked if Brittany's teacher hadn't informed them that she always participated in such events, but this was the first time she had seen her there. Brittany explained that the Alice family was well known in the mathematical community in Yabo City and had been participating in the workshop on behalf of their family for many years. Alice extended her hand to Blair, introducing herself. "My name is Alice, and I'm in my 3rd year at Chandon NASA Academy. I'm Isabella's classmate. It's a pleasure to meet you. I hope my joke didn't offend you." Blair reciprocated the introduction, and Alice leaned in closely to examine him. He couldn't help but glance at her chest as she complimented him on his performance that day. She noted it was the first time she had seen the Howard family go from arrogant and pompous to so pathetic. "Can we study mathematics in depth together?" Blair politely declined, suggesting she should ask her teacher for advice instead, as he had learned a lot from her. Alice smiled, remarking that he couldn't be figured out so easily. She said goodbye, adding that when no one was around, they could chat more. So Blair bid her farewell, and Isabella indignantly asked what it meant that they would chat when no one was around. Brittany also said goodbye to Alice, and Isabella told Blair that he had immediately forgotten everything. He didn't mind going with her. Blair turned around and asked why he should go with her. Isabella pointed a finger at him and exclaimed that they were all the same. They would see a beautiful girl and immediately run after her. Blair scratched his nose and calmly asked if she could compare to herself. Isabella blushed, replying that maybe she could, and he thought she was prettier. Blair confirmed her words, causing her to feel even more embarrassed. She thought he was such a fool, but if he meant not the figure but the face, then that sounded good. Suddenly, Calvin approached them and greeted them. Brittany smiled and asked what he was doing there. Calvin replied that he was the main character of the evening and that he could not even say hello. So Blair responded that he simply helped them solve a problem and mentioned one number in passing. Calvin retorted that the problem he solved and the number he mentioned were not simple at all. The Howard family considered the riddle of the 7 bridges to be their pride, but now he said that this riddle had no solution. This revelation had cast doubt on the Howard family's position within the mathematical society. Calvin continued, saying that the mathematical society could solve complex problems, yet now they could not even find a segment using the number Blair referred to. That can this number really be found? If not, the entire society and even a world of mathematics will be shaken. That he wanted to know who Blair was, why such talent had suddenly appeared, and what his goal was. Blair smiled, asking what Calvin was talking about. Everyone saw how Phage had asked him to solve a problem. He simply had an idea and voiced it. As for that number, it was purely curiosity. Didn't Howard say that they would definitely find this number together with the mathematical society? Calvin agreed, admitting he had imagined that. He reassured Blair that their society was always on the side of truth, but warned him to be careful with the Howard family. He feared he should not compete with them. And meanwhile, the Viscount sat in a chair in front of his beaten son, who lay on the floor, breathing heavily from the blows he had just taken. The Viscount's subordinate informed him that everything was ready and they could begin. The Viscount replied that they would wait until he left the estate, just like before. They needed to make it look like an accident. No one should see it. The subordinate bowed, and suddenly the Viscount's second son, Abel, spoke up, saying he was killing again. So the blonde young man stood behind his father, smiling. The Viscount turned around and called out to Abel, asking if it was him again. The subordinate looked at Abel in surprise, saying it was impossible. He did it with his own hands. Abel approached and said that their surprise was normal, as he himself had ordered it. He then approached Phage, and the Viscount jumped up from his chair, asking why Phage hadn't died and why he was still there. "Is this Blair your man?" Abel replied that Blair was cruel and set a bad example for his brother. The Viscount pulled out a revolver and demanded answer to his question. Phage looked at his brother in surprise as Abel stood up, saying that he was asking too many questions. It stated that he would tell the Viscount that the young man named Blair was not related to him at all, but he had an excellent reason to return. So what will he do? I can tell you that he is going to completely change the Howard family.